This is about reactionary action as a way of knowing things. A capable artisan or scholar cuts a good figure if he has pride in his art and looks pleasantly and contentedly upon life. On the other hand, there is no sight more wretched than that of a cobbler or a schoolmaster who, with the air of a martyr, gives one to understand that he was really born for something better. There is nothing better than what is good, so wrote Friedrich Nietzsche. Devotion to making well is analogous to living out one's potential, and this, according to Nietzsche, gives his life meaning. For Nietzsche, alarmed at the inroads made by rationalism and enlightenment into the soul of man, the artist becomes a paradigm of man liberated from humanism, scientism, socialism, and Christianity, who can go on to re-establish the foundational values of society. Here is Martin Heidegger on Nietzsche, quote, "Art, thought to be in the broadest sense as the creative, constitutes the basic character of beings. Accordingly, art in the narrower sense is that activity in which creation emerges for itself and becomes more perspicacious. It is not merely one configuration of will to power among others, but the supreme configuration. Will to power becomes genuinely visible in terms of art and as art, but will to power is the ground upon which all valuation in future will stand. It is the principle of the new valuation, as opposed to the prior one, which was dominated by religion, morality, and philosophy. If will to power therefore finds its supreme configuration in art, the positing of the new relation of will to power must proceed from art." End of quote. Will to power is the concept of consciously determining or adopting one's personal values and imposing them on the world around. Nietzsche wrote, quote, "Art is the distinctive counter-movement to nihilism," unquote. As art springs from conscious values, aesthetics is a field of meaning and social values expressed through culture. Art is creative. The assertion of values, nihilism is destructive, the negation of values. Nihilism is a rejection of the potential of contribution. It asserts a severance from culture that came before, and it's the significance accorded to that art. Nietzsche thought that a unified man who combined the Dionysian passion and deep instinct with Apollonian order and rationality was a reflection of a society that combined the halves of man's nature in a fruitful and honest manner. The artist was an exemplar of that. The reactionary man is the Aristotelian man who embodies virtue rather than signalling it. He is driven by the impetus to create, not theorize. Theorization can be the respectable counterpart of prevarication. The progressive man is skeptical, analytical. He appropriates and adapts. Whenever he cannot win his case through persuasion, he will manipulate and make changes secretly. Whatever a reactionary's aesthetics and aims are, generally speaking, they arise through acculturation and instinct, albeit a cultivated instinct or an inculcated instinct, not through theory. I'm not speaking of strategy, tactics, or politics here, but of an understanding of the world and of human nature. What the reactionary knows is from inherited wisdom or direct observation. It is not a proposition ex nihilo. The reactionary man can think, but he sets no store on originality nor opening up new fields of knowledge. Perhaps this is understandable that given my circumstances, I reach for the artist as a template of reactionary anti-modern man. Progressive man relies on the feminization of public spaces, such as the museum, the library, the debating chamber, the university, and the parliament, those institutions that reactionary man founded. Progressive man is feminized man. He has his uses as long as he is kept in his place, because we benefit from having men and women, weak and strong, passive and active, thinkers and doers, scientists and soldiers, priests and, dare I say, merchants. Balance benefits all of us as long as the parts are kept in correct proportion, which does not mean equal. Harmony comes through correct balance and knowing, intuiting even, the correct proportions and places for components. As with architecture and art, so with society. Here is Nietzsche again on the impact of ugliness. Quote, "Nothing is beautiful except man alone. All aesthetics rests on this naivete, which is its first truth. Let us immediately add the second. Nothing is ugly except the degenerating man. And with this, the realm of aesthetic judgment is circumscribed. Physiologically, everything ugly weakens and saddens man. It reminds him of decay, danger, impotence. It actually deprives him of strength. One can measure the effect of the ugly with a dynamometer. Whenever man is depressed at all, he senses the proximity of something ugly. His feeling of power, his will to power, his courage, his pride, all fall with the ugly and rise with the beautiful," unquote. That man is the measure of all things is a common staple dating back to the Roman Vitruvius and earlier. The earliest philosophers of aesthetics knew that we reach for beauty aside from any consideration of material advantage. Making art was seen as a form of worship. The work of the artista in ancient times, the artista was any skilled fabricator of objects or even of ideas, was a reflection of God as creator. The use of objects and stories that people told about those objects in connection to the maker, the original owner, and other objects became culture. We recognize within ourselves a yearning for beauty, and we feel an impact from the deprivation of beauty and the impact of ugliness. So much of our world is made ugly by new things, buildings that are ugly and proportioned to intimidate. They turn our cities into places that bombard us with impressions of our weakness and insignificance. Even the fact that we cannot reject the forms of these buildings or tear them down, and the fact that they are erected against our will, so often irrevocably altering our beloved skyline, is a power play, one designed to impress upon us our inferior status. That is not just our own current lowly position in the social hierarchy, but our status as a fallen society. It is no wonder that this leads us to revolt against the modern. Old buildings of beauty are made ugly by the addition of new extensions that are crude and which seem designed to humiliate the building. It is a form of ritual shaming. Likewise, the noble forms of men and women are made ugly with tattoos and piercings. Apologies to some of you. Not looking at anyone in particular. Modern persons make themselves look ugly, and then they dare you to be revolted. They make themselves absurd and then dare you to laugh. They dare you to be judgmental, then take offense at your response. Aposematism is when an animal develops a protective coloration. A frog that is bright red or a snake that is yellow and orange are telling predators that they are poisonous and to keep away. When a person makes themselves look ugly, they are telling you that they feel ugly about themselves and that you should beware. The environment of the city is being depleted of its historical character and turned into a node of international architecture. This is a deliberate campaign to demoralize us and displace historical associations so that we become detached from place and also from history. It feeds into the progressive desire to rewrite history and rewrite people. This campaign says that there is a new normal and you will never have the spiritual oneness that your forebears had. When we think of reactionary narratives, we think of words, of stories of values. Perhaps we should think in terms of places and objects. We can reject what we find offensive and hurtful because it is intended to hurt and demean us, and build places with dignity and grace. There does seem a reluctance to commit to physical culture in our spheres. Much of that is to do with a lack of funding, opportunity, and permission. But it also seems an innate fear of failing. There seems a lingering reticence. Just as the online edgelord calls action in the real world cringe, so even rich men are afraid to be mocked for their taste if they were to commit to a building or a painting and being derided by the tastemakers of their time, or even just their acquaintances. I cannot remember who made this observation, but there is this deep fear of being shamed by one's peers, especially when it comes to cultural taste. In terms of public profile, I'd like to sort of give a shout out to Shieldings, to John and Evelyn, to Carl Benjamin and Lotus Eaters, to the Bournebrook Press, Bournebrook magazine, for actually standing up and putting their names to things and having the bravery to commit and risking failure, but actually investing their reputation as well as money. Tradition arises through the emergence of metaphysical truths that manifest themselves in custom, habit, repetition, and the work of men, individually and collectively. The ideological and theoretical models of the world derived in isolation from observation of perennial truths must be progressive because they seek to assert the natural order. Rather than assessing what is true and seeking to understand the tragic, constrained vision of human nature, as the reactionary does, the progressive presupposes what ought to be and then seeks to implement that utopian, unconstrained vision, regardless of the truth of the world. This acceptance of our tragic limitation does not forestall acknowledgement that we are capable of great collective work, and that such work only comes about when we know our human flaws, something that the progressive utopian rejects. Every society has stories it tells itself that incorporate its values and nominates heroes and villains. Perhaps the way for us to write our story is by doing and allowing the story to emerge from our actions, from our physical culture, here and now. We should not theorize now, but allow our narrative to arise out of what we make and what we choose to discard. The theme of this conference is logos and praxis, from a dissident perspective. Let's look at the dictionary definitions of praxis. Exercise or practice of a skill, the implementation of a concept in practice, the testing of a theory through practice, the realization of ideas through application. Progressivism and liberalism are theory-led and demand praxis. After all, as so many neo-Marxists will tell you, there is no point in theory that does not result in action. It seems to me that there may be no praxis for a reactionary, only doing. For the religious among us, the issue is not praxis but duty to our families, God, the wider clan and tradition. That entails no innovation, only obedience, and it requires leadership. The reactionary sees himself as a spiritual being acting as an imperfect heir, one who seeks acceptance among his ancestors. The progressive sees himself as a material entity acting towards the betterment of humanity, of which he is the current culmination. For the reactionary, action is the following of deep tradition and enactment of natural law. In other words, there is no reactionary praxis. The reactionary creator follows his instinct, hardly different from those of a huntsman. When he works, he gains an intuitive understanding of his tools and his materials. He knows how the blade will twist in his hand. He can feel the grain of the wood in the log. He knows the ring of true stone and the clank of flawed stone when he wraps it. I know how the paint will lie when I apply it, and I could only know that through intuiting, with intuition the result of experience. These are the emergence of hidden truths that are uncovered by tutorship, experience, observation. This is internalized as a kind of muscle memory, which links him to his ancestors, a profound instinct that has a poetry to which men respond, especially men. This is akin to how a hunter knows the way an animal runs, or how the matador knows where to place the sword. The progressive sees the bullfight as no sport at all and cheers the bull on, regardless of the qualities of the bull and the man, revealing an innate misanthropy. The reactionary knows the bullfight is no sport, but sacrifice and a chance for a man and a beast to prove their valor. The bull's death is certain before he enters the arena. All that is to be decided is his quality before he dies. The reactionary understands the truth due to doing. The progressive fails to understand due to thinking. I'll give you an interlude here. I once gave a lecture at a university, I think it was at Aberystwyth. There was an exhibition of my art there, and I gave an illustrated talk about my career. At the end, there was a question and answer session. One of the art students asked, should I become a full-time artist? I said no. You've already answered your question. If you were suitable to be an artist, you would be asking me, how do I become an artist? How do I survive as an artist? I didn't have a choice. Art chose me. I knew I needed to make art. I just didn't know exactly how I would arrange my life around that activity. If you've got any doubt at all, then it isn't the right life for you. All the best art was made by people who are obsessed by art, by looking at it, by making at it, sometimes, more rarely, by talking to others about it. Great art was never made by a dabbler, a talented amateur, or someone who walked away from art. A great artist is obsessed. He feels he can always do better, not just better than himself, but better than the greatest artist who ever lived. Or that was roughly what I said. I'm paraphrasing here. It's perhaps not so terse or eloquent. I remember he looked a bit crushed, and I did feel a touch sorry for him. He was probably searching for some pithy tip on how to get by as an artist. Instead, I ran my bulldozer over his dreams and crushed him. I now extend my apologies to him across the ether of indeterminate time and space, but I'm also sure that I was right, and I'm also sure he never became an artist. Once an artwork is made, it goes off to live or die in the wider world as part of the collections of private persons and companies, and less often museums. We have entered a time when the paradigm of male is male creator, female curator. In the past, it would have been male creator, male curator, male collector, but female buyer. For the woman, historically, makes the home and often decides the decor. With the entrance of women into the workplace, we see the museum become feminized. They are not, as their male predecessors were, impelled by a duty to preserve and record, but to change. They introduce the concept of social justice into museums, which necessitates ritually shaming artworks and seeking to remove artworks. The process of deaccessioning, which is the technical term for museums permanently removing objects from their collection, is being pressed for today by curators as they attempt to salve the historical wounds of underrepresentation of demographic groups. The women and over-socialized men who run our museums have not even the passing familiarity of the effort and skill it takes to make art, but they are on a crusade to reduce, erase, and improve. All of this is headed by the Museums Association, an organisation established in 1889 dedicated to providing ethical guidance for museum staff. This is an association now run entirely by women and feminised men. Go to their website, and among the promotional photographs you will find barely a male or white face. This is deliberate, as I found too for the National Trust, as described in my book, Artivism, on sale later. These are the managerial, non-governing elite, hard at work under the hood, reorganising the engine of culture. They have never built an engine, they have never serviced one competently, they do not understand the principles, but they are sure they can alter an engine to be more equitable. Of course it is inequality, hierarchy, exceptionality, cussed, unbowed individuals selected by the grace of God or by the shuffling of their genes to be geniuses who are the engine of culture. The Pareto principle tells us that those exceptional individuals will do the meaningful work. I think it's less than 20% or less than 20% of any cohort. Once you start to change that engine or build it from scratch, selecting the engine parts on the basis of their shininess or feeling sad about those parts that were historically excluded from engines, you've broken your engine, you've broken your vehicle, and I suppose as you sit there sulking, you can claim you only had good intentions. Except you never did have good intentions. You improvers, you tweakers, you meddlers, you women. You were always driven by resentment, a topic Nietzsche covered at length. Egalitarianism is not kindness, it is resentment at the unbending unfairness of the world, at the imperious inflexibility of nature, at the power of the divine. Egalitarianism is a revolt against God, nature, and proper order that reveals itself to the contemplator and seeker of truth. The craftsman will tell you that types of wood are not made equal, and the blunt blade is not only a danger to the wielder, it is an insult to the wood, it is slander to tradition. The worker knows that there has never been equality between men and women, between animals and men, between any things in the world. He knows it because he lives it. He knows what ropes will support which weight. The maker, the doer, the reactionary man who understands the world through action, learns the truth and knows that a lie will ruin the stone, break the tool, topple the structure, kill the man. That is why I say to you, as an artist, beware the woman or the progressive man given any power over a machine he or she did not build, to run an organisation they did not found, to command any society at all. As we speak, the doors of museum stores are open, and women and over-socialised men are filling the stores with art of women, ethnic minorities, social minorities, and foreigners who are chosen precisely for such reductive reasons because of who they are. And this is done by curators of today because they cannot help being who they are. They are contaminating our patrimony with mediocrity. They are farmers who shovel in grit into a silo of wheat because they feel sorry for the grit. They are the drivers of a car with an internal combustion engine who fill their fuel tank with water because water is the most plentiful liquid on the planet, and surely it is time that water gets its chance to show what it can do. Believe me, the water will get its chance. We must be mad to have let this happen. What comes to mind is Shakespeare's Othello and the line, "O God, that men should put an enemy in their mouths to steal away their brains." Except, of course, they did not do that to themselves. It was done to them. I leave other speakers to suggest who those other influences were. What would keep a reactionary artist going? Praise, exposure, companionship, if he's that way inclined, enough money to keep a roof over his head. But there comes a time when he must choose between art and a family, and in some cases, literally, to decide between making art alone or marrying and giving up art. The lucky ones find a way to combine family with making art, but too often the world is deprived of either the art or of the children that the reactionary man is worth. And if a reactionary man is worth anything, he could contribute much. The father, in the past, in the Renaissance period, art would be a family affair. The father would be the master of the studio, the wife would handle the money and the tradesman, the children would model or work as assistants. The idea of a whole family, even an extended family, living off the income of one earner is quite distant to us, and that has obviously changed the calculations. Here are two reflections on a dissident artist. This came up as part of my research for my next book on Salvador Dali, published by Prestel next year. I'm also working on further writings about reactionary aesthetics. When the filmmaker Louis Buñuel wrote to his friend Salvador Dali in 1939, he was asking for a loan. The pair had met as students in Madrid and had gone on to make two masterpieces of transgressive cinema, Un Chien Andalou and L'Âge d'Or. At that time, both of them, as surrealists, had publicly supported communism and anti-clericalism and did so up through the 1930s. Dali was threatened with expulsion from the surrealist group by the leader in 1934. Breton accused him of counter-revolutionary acts tending to the glorification of Hitlerian fascism, unquote. The expulsion was only rescinded after Dali signed a document declaring himself to be an ally of the proletariat. Believe that, if you will. By the time of Buñuel's letter in 1939, things had changed. Franco had won the Spanish Civil War. Dali had moved from being the darling of the surrealist movement to being on its fringes. Dali was a very rich man by this stage, which was, of course, why Buñuel was writing to him for money. Dali was a celebrity and the wealthiest artist in America. Dali became rich through selling art to Hollywood movie producers, New York socialites, and French aristocrats. This gave the artist independence from the surrealists, who were largely politically left-wing, and obviously the social milieu of high society was largely liberalist. Dali no longer had to make the pretense of solidarity with the proletariat or conforming to communist ideology. Dali would be the only surrealist to express admiration for Hitler or Franco. At the end of Dali's reply to Bunwell's letter, he decided that, on balance, he would not loan Bunwell any money. Bunwell was a supporter and advocate for left-wing causes, antithetical to Dali's values and well-being. Whatever one's personal aesthetic taste, it is undeniable that Dali went on to paint in the 1950s some of the most significant religious paintings of the 20th century. Had he remained tied artistically, socially and financially to the surrealist group that was committed to communism and anti-theism, he would not have created those religious works. Dali produced religious paintings expressing the wonder and power of the revealed wisdom of Catholic Christianity, but he himself was not religious. He did not, as a rule, go to Mass nor perform good works. He did not believe in the afterlife, and his private life was far from pious. He was as materialistic as any non-Christian. Yet his devotional painting is a brilliant coup de théâtre, which advanced the case for mystical Christianity in an era, viewed at a continental level, that was hostile to Christianity. So clearly you'll be thinking of Dali as the propagator of Catholic mysticism in terms of a bifurcated logos and praxis. Or you could just call him a hypocrite. Yet Dali did not believe in following the teachings of the church, although he believed in himself and his ability to make astonishing paintings that might strengthen the faith of Catholics and cement Franco's Spain as a place that upheld traditional values and produced new art. Ultimately, although it is opportunity that allows artists to produce and express freely the character within, the differences between reactionary man and progressive man are matters of temperament and breeding. Dali made a very bad communist artist and a much better Catholic artist, but that was not decided by opportunity, it was decided by his character. To conclude, let us briefly go over the actions we can take to embody our values and transmit them to others. Rather than praxis, I suggest that we revive and restore forms that existed before the era of tax-funded, state-directed culture. We must redouble our efforts to build strong networks of collaboration and patronage. Again, that involves working privately, establishing apprenticeships and stipends, arranging open and curated exhibitions, celebrating local talent, publishing new art, spurning the nodes of globalist culture, building our let's say eternal, let's be optimistic, our eternal alternative economy. I cannot speak about cryptocurrency, but I do suggest that we use cash as much as possible. Consult Dan on that as to how valuable your cash is going to be in 10 years' time. Buy books, buy art, buy physical copies of journals. Buy books from Imperium, Rogue Scholar, Imprint Academic and Born Book Press. Physical copies are essential. Finally, I commend we resist and demonstrate our resistance. That means identifying and removing opponents through lawfare, public pressure and back channel methods. This is suggested without illusions. When I helped to take down the political operative who was the director of the ICA Gallery in London, I knew the replacement would be essentially the same. I knew the system would protect itself. I knew there would be no actual change. But I was the only critic in the middle of his career, as opposed to at the end, who was public in this action. Any critics or commentators who wish to be taken seriously by us or want to receive any favourable treatment by us should we be in a position to assist them, must make themselves known now, at this crucial time. Do not wait until the balance of power has shifted in our favour. Show your courage and stand with me publicly. Soon enough we will be joined by others. But of course we will remember the people who stood up first. Systemic change is not possible due to the replacement of individuals because the individual is not important in the current system. An individual is only appointed to such a position if they have negligible will and independence, only if they are totally subordinate to the elite. When we force them to show that their accountability is fake, that regulations are not enforced, that corruption in the system goes to the top, and that no elected political party will permit reformation of the system, we get them to expose themselves. This demonstrates to ourselves and to our sympathisers and opponents that we understand the situation, that we reject their values, that we do not concede they have a legitimate hold over anything they have not built. We signal to potential defectors and allies within the non-governing elite that we exist and we will not back down because the beliefs of the current elite are repugnant to us and we have superior beliefs. We resist to show others and ourselves that we have the courage to defend our values, our patrimony, and our people without apology and without quarter. Thank you. So you all have a long time to ask me questions. By the way, before you start questions, I will mention, in case I forget, that I will be signing books afterwards. I'm a professional writer. The only income I get is from writing books or writing articles. I do not have a job. I do not have any paid position. I'm not on benefits either. Any Guardian writers out there? So buying books is a way of expressing your support for me and helping me to carry on working. So I'll open it to the floor.
Oh, I'll say thank you for the talk. It was very, very good. The question I wanted to ask is about something earlier in the talk. You mentioned about the revulsion a lot of people have intuitively about modern architecture, the modern building. It's something I've found that a lot of people share but don't know how to express it. Is there some way you think that we can exploit that or expand on that? Or it seems to be a latent feeling with people, but it's not really, there's not really a movement behind it. So.
Well, last year we had the excellent speaker, Slingsby, yes, Edward Slingsby, who's actually a practicing architect, and he said that there is a strong repulsion and revulsion against modern forms. But we also have, I have to say, that I've always advocated additionality rather than subtraction. So I think that people, if you take away it's easier to acquire a taste than it is to force someone to lose their taste. So it's better, and it's also possible for people to accept things that they don't necessarily like. So for example, the artist Emil Nolde, the German expressionist, was a supporter of the Nazi Party. His art was also expressionist and it was deemed degenerate. So he was officially blacklisted from painting. But he supported the movement because he felt that from his perspective, what the government was doing was right for society as a whole, even though it impacted him badly. So you'll find that there are some people here who are fans of, for example, brutalist architecture. So brutalist architecture is the giant concrete high-rises. They often appear in rather nice coffee table books that I get to review for £30 a time. And I know that there are a lot of more reactionary or right-wing people, younger people, who enjoy that aesthetic. And I think it's easier for you to say to them, look, on the balance of society, it's better for us not to build up any more of these, and for when they reach the end of their lifespan to remove them and not replace them with replace them with something smaller, something more traditional, something more local, especially local, using local materials, local architects, local designs. And I think that a lot of your reactionaries who like brutalism will accept that, and they will go along with that, and they will say, okay, yeah, this is something I like, but I understand why politically and socially it's not a good thing to promote at the moment. I will accept the fact that we're going to build something different. So I think it's a question of suggesting that you're going to add things that are going to benefit society rather than take stuff away.
Yep, over here. Very good speech. What I got a sense from is when you were talking, there was two types of attitudes within contemporary art. That there was the artist who viewed art as sort of just replaceable. But then there was the artist who was the craftsman. Camus talks about this as well, the French writer, that it's not anti-racism that we're fighting, but it's actually replacement, that just, this is a painting and we can replace it. So my question is with this idea of replacement, there seems to be a relationship with that in technology. How does the craftsman artist, in the reign of techniques and technology, how does he cultivate this craftsmanship in this era?
Well, first of all, on the question of replacement, yes, this is definitely a thing that's happening. Even if you you like traditional art and you think that this will be outside of the purview of progressives, they will take it away from you. I recently did a book review of a catalogue, an exhibition catalogue of Canadian modernism. This is relatively mild modernism from the 1910s and 1920s, of landscapes, beautiful wooded landscapes, dramatic bays and seascapes, and all the wonderful sunsets that you get in Canada. And this is a group of 7, quite famous and beloved in Canada. And the curators of the new exhibition took it upon themselves to berate the artists for not sufficiently including Indigenous minorities or not reflecting the impact of mining or logging and so forth, you know, the environmental lobby. So that curators have decided that attachment to traditional art means attachment to traditional society, and that also means a mono-racial society or a colonialist society if you're from North America. And this is forbidden, this will be shamed, this will be removed from you, and you will be humiliated just as those artists are humiliated. So what do you do if you're a young artist today? I would say, with regards to technology, I'm not sure. With regards to traditional artists, or artists working in traditional materials, not necessarily traditional themes, because I know that this is the big debate between the reactionary and the traditional aesthetics. Can you be a reactionary and also like modernism? To be a traditionalist, can you embody traditional values in new art, in modernist idioms? It's possible. I would say to young artists, try and cultivate a viewership or a readership. Try and cultivate patrons. Stay out of the system as much as you can. Don't go to university.
Hello, Alexander.
Hi,
Fantastic
Mark.
talk. Thank you
you.
very much. Following on from last year's talk as well, very similar theme, very good. You mentioned about how there's this kind of natural revulsion. And I would say that it's something I've noticed, especially in younger generations, who've had less exposure to perhaps more historical art, certainly less exposure to the canon. But there is a kind of appreciation and a longing for what we would consider to be ugly things. So whilst most people will say, you know, they're not a particular fan of brutalism or something like that, but they do love IKEA furniture and that kind of simplistic thing. I suppose my question to you is it feels like, because that's all come from the Scandinavian culture as well as anything else, how do we and to an extent it's exposure, how do we expose people once we've built these private collections? How do we gain enough traction with them, I suppose, to expose people and bring that love back so that people aren't just used to seeing, you know, great steel and glass monstrosities, the stock IKEA, everyone's got the same table sort of thing, and they actually actively seek out these kind of greater works of art and therefore connect with their spiritualism through that?
Well, first of all, I would say start collecting, start buying, cultivate your taste, but don't be worried about being embarrassed about your taste in the same way that you shouldn't be embarrassed about your politics or about your values. And express your politics and your values through what you put your money into, what you want to live with, where you want to live. Now, obviously, you don't get a great deal of choice. You can't all live in a stately home or a beautiful rustic cottage and so forth. You're going to have to compromise to some degree. But build those things, collect them, find out about them, and talk about them to people who care about them. The way you change things is you make it high status. Modernism is high status. Modernism is the language of the progressives, the language of the current elite. If you align with more traditional forms, other forms, non-modern forms, what will happen is that when there is a rise, I think, especially in localism, I think this is the big thing. If you can push localism, not necessarily nationalism, but localism, that you can, I think you can energize and connect with people by saying, this is your tradition, this is our tradition, this is the tradition of the people who went before, it's worth cultivating, it's worth examining, and it's high status to have an affiliation with this rather than simply to go with the international finance funded international buildings, the glass and steel designs and so forth, which dominate our current landscape.
Hi there. I very much enjoyed that talk. One thing that I was going to ask about, because we hear about painting and poetry and novels, but I think one area that we don't hear about on the small scale in our circles with people just beginning is film. And so I wanted to ask you, what is your assessment of the current scene in, say, Hollywood? Do you think there are still directors who are making films that speak to somebody with sort of reactionary inclinations, and if so, could you name some and talk about some of your favorites? And also, if you were a young person and you were wanting to get into film, do you know any sort of projects that are going on, or do you have any recommendations?
Well, I would say if you want to sort of, yes, I would say David Lynch. David Lynch is kind of, yeah, well, great minds think alike. Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of Lynch. He's inconsistent, and he's obviously he was part of the Hollywood system, or he's somewhat stepped out of it. He could step out of it because he had some independent finance. I mean, some of his best films were financed by French companies, so he didn't have to rely on the big studios in America for funding. So that gave him a degree of independence. I think he's very interesting because he's reactionary in that he's looking at quite raw emotions, raw passions, and some of that's quite ugly, some of it's quite strange. A lot of people find it grotesque. It's meant to be grotesque, but there are aspects of ordinary human nature which are themselves grotesque. And I think that as reactionaries, you are duty bound to see this and discuss it, to acknowledge it, even if you don't discuss it in your own work, even if you don't choose to look at it. You can't deny that this is there. I think that the reactionary understands that there are primitive, strange and ugly aspects to the human condition, and that automatically comes out. If you want to talk about, I would say that, obviously, with the technology of film becoming so much more cheap and so much more available, I think that reaching a lot of people through digital filmmaking and distributing online or through online platforms or so forth is a very good way of reaching a large number of people. As to projects about sort of filming or good entrees into that circle, I would say talk to our friend Curtis Yarvin, wherever he's gone. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Poe.
Thanks very much for that talk. I was born in the ashes, and I think you'll have to drag me kicking and screaming away from my IKEA furniture and my anime, but I aspire to be better than I am, and I'd just like to ask where in this country, on the whole planet, is there what collections should I go and see to support the work of white men, and with my money and with my attention.
Well, you go to any museum that stops collecting at the year 1900, and you'd be supporting the work of white men. Unfortunately, they're all dead, of course. But
can you name any specifically? I just, as if I'm an alien who just came from space who's never heard of a single museum.
Well, obviously, you go to the great museums. So the Victoria and Albert, the National Gallery. Obviously the great museums of Europe, so sort of like the Louvre and the Alte National Gallery and so forth. They still have a good reputation. They will be the last to fall as far as erosion. Any museum which collects art after 1900 is busily, as I said, they've opened the doors and they're filling the storerooms with art that's chosen for demographic reasons. It's not to do with the quality of art. So that is naturally depleting the quality of the collections. So if you go to the Tate, you'll see you'll see some modern masters, and then you'll see a lot of artists who you've never heard of, with unpronounceable names, and you know why they're there. So I would say just avoid those institutions that have a remit to collect recent art. So. Do we have someone with a microphone? Oh, sorry. Oh, hi.
Hello, yeah.
Hi, Matt.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Adams. That was a very inspiring talk. So something I've seen very emergent in the past 5 months that is quite concerning is AI that is producing art, things like Wombo and various other APIs that they're developing very quick and producing remarkably beautiful works. And a bit of schizo in me is kind of terrified of it because it seems to be leeching off this hunger that people are having for real art, because they're so fed up of seeing all the dross. And this stuff does make spectacular things, but it actually seems like an actual threat because people are going to, rather than wanting to produce their own, they now have this very rapid, just type in a prompt, you've got something amazing that takes their idea and does more with it than they think they could have done. And this seems to be neutering a lot of potential artists. So given the speed of it, I mean, the past 5 months has been quite scary. Another 5 months with this software development, I was like, oh God, what's going to go on here? How are we going to make ourselves producing art fast enough to combat that?
Well, you'll find that some of this actually goes back further than you think. When abstract art started in the sort of the 1910s or something, or Impressionist painting started becoming famous, and the Fauvists became famous, there was a guy called Frede who had a sort of cafe in Paris, and what he used to do is he used to invite people round to see his donkey, and he would tie a paintbrush to the tail of the donkey and then get the tail to wag, and it would be wagging across a canvas, and then he would exhibit these as abstract artworks. And of course, the thing to do is what you do is you invite in an art critic, and then they make fools of themselves by praising the quality of the palette and the brushwork and the passion that went into this work, and then only to be told that it was made by a donkey. Yeah, I see that this is a problem. I can't see a solution to this in the way that I can't see a solution to AI in general. But see my future video where someone will have synced up my mouth and my words with some completely fallacious statement, and I'll look very wise in that future fake video. I don't know.
I always initially try to view any art form through the lens of the true, the good, and the beautiful. And I used to have the opinion that aesthetics had the ability to pass that on to other people. I'm quite doubtful of that now. I just want to know, do you think that how important is which one has a greater ability to change the mind? Is it the viewing of the artwork, or can the aesthetics of the artwork change the viewer on their metaphysics or their philosophies?
Yes. Well, this sounds like a plug. It sounds like a planted question, but I've recently been writing my Foundations of Aesthetics, soon to be launched on the academic agency. And part of that was, you go back to, well done, checking the post. And part of that was that the original thinkers on aesthetics in ancient times, they said that, Plotinus said that truth, beauty, and goodness were all linked, and that this was the virtuous triangle. You had all of these in art, and these were the foundations of aesthetics. All art had to be a discussion, a representation of truth. It was also morally good, because it was a representation of what God had created or what God had intended. And it was also beautiful. And beauty only came from truth and goodness. So it was a sort of an indivisible triangle. And that was later separated by the Enlightenment, I'm afraid. Yes, and there was this idea that was developed that the physiological reaction, so I think it's Burke's on the beautiful and the sublime, where Burke describes sort of like a reaction to beauty as being like a physiological thing. So in the way you would be awed by a volcano or by a waterfall, you could be awed by a work of art, and that this was not actually an aesthetic. This was not actually a considered appreciation or a reflection of truth. This was just your body responding to something that made you frightened or made you excited. As far as how we get back to that, I would say greater education, perhaps including taking my Foundations of Aesthetics course. Talking about these things, not being ashamed about having different tastes, and also understanding if you go back to those original writers, so go back to the Greeks, go back to the schoolmen of the medieval period, read their works. They have some very interesting things to say. You may not agree with everything, but they will present you with a completely different perspective. So it's really vital to look at those old authors, get good translations if you don't speak the original language, which I think very few of us do. Have a look at those old texts, and you will be amazed at the thoughtfulness and the exciting things that they discuss that we no longer consider acceptable, or the elite have chosen to represent to us as unthinkable.
Yeah, Alexander. So I was discussing with AA this week about, you know, being integrated and authentic, acting in a pure way. I think you were talking about that. As opposed to being at a rational remove, postmodern, always a bit cynical, right? Not being able to...
Not being cringe. No.
Well, no, I'm talking about being able to sort of flow, right? As opposed to kind of you're always... the editor is always there, you know, and you can't just flow creatively. So AA thinks that our generation just isn't capable of like that kind of flow because of Spinglerian cycle theory and so forth, that we'll have to wait for another generation formed by hardship. But let's set aside Spinglerian cycle theory and AA's own personal, like Daria thing, you know. And I just want to ask you on a more personal level what your experience is. Do you find that you're able to turn off your internal Gen Xer or whatever and just flow? Yes,
I think so. I think once you've stepped aside from postmodernism, because postmodernism has an inbuilt irony, it has inbuilt detachment, it has inbuilt cynicism. So you can do anything you want, and then if you get a bad reaction, you can say, well, I wanted that reaction. Oh, of course I wasn't being serious. Of course I was parodying the idea of beauty. I was critiquing the idea of beauty. I didn't seriously mean this. Of course you did. You didn't think I'd seriously believe that, did you? It's a way of deflecting criticism and actually sort of obviating all analysis, because obviously to do with postmodernism, you need a certain set of basic set of assumptions. You have basic linguistic tools that you can apply so that you all have a common frame of reference. Postmodernism says that this is just the arrangement of power. It's just you know, the intersection of different oppressions and so forth. So that takes away your language. So that's why you get so much aesthetics from when I was writing the course. You see that so much aesthetics now is just based on the question of who gets to define art? Is it an institution? Is it an artist? And so forth. And that's a real problem because it detaches us from having genuine aesthetic discussions. It becomes a discussion of power, it becomes a discussion of politics, though of course politics is always involved in everything. I'm not suggesting that there is such a thing as apolitical, purely apolitical art or anything like that. How do I personally turn that off? Well, I just make work that really interests me and really excites me as an artist. If anyone's interested, I don't have any art catalogues here, but you can find them on the Bournebrook Press book website. So you can actually see my art there, or you can just go on the internet and type in Alexander Adams artist, and you'll find a whole bunch of pictures, so you can just sort of look through. I just paint pictures that really excite me and really interest me, and I commit to them, and I have my name on them, and I'm proud of them, even though you might find some of them distasteful or some of them ugly. But as I said, I think it's a reactionary's duty to be able to acknowledge that there are ugly things, that there are shocking things, and sometimes our tastes are unusual. And that's not necessarily to celebrate those tastes, it's to understand those tastes and to look at them, to look at ugliness and to look at evil sometimes. So I would just say that I produce the work that I believe in and that I'm not ashamed about it, and nothing that I've done is ironic. I don't think I'm cut out for irony. So.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for your talk. I thought it was really good. My question was sort of following on from Poe's a little bit. So in terms of collecting art, aside from yourself, do you know any other modern reactionary white men who are producing art that we can add to our collections?
Well, I've never thought of myself as a white artist. I suppose maybe that's what the reactionaries would shame me for not identifying, or the ethno-nats would shame me for not identifying with my where is years. Yeah, I mean, things that when I review art, because I write lots of art reviews, a lot of the time I'm not even thinking about the politics or the national origin or the skin color of the artist. I'm just looking at the artist as an artist. In terms of a good artist who's working now, I would say have a look at someone called Glenn Brown. I don't know what his politics are, but he likes all sorts of art that is deemed horrible and kitsch and sort of beyond the pale. And he genuinely loves this stuff, and he genuinely paints in this way. So Glenn Brown, that's Glenn with 2 N's. He actually went to Goldsmiths, which is the college that I went to. It was the super progressive place that produced Damien Hirst and Sarah Lucas and so forth. So Goldsmiths was the hub of progressive man in the art world, and that's where I went, and that's kind of what I reacted against. I end up sort of being spat out as a reject because I couldn't. Because I wasn't postmodern, I didn't have that attitude, I didn't have that mentality. So that system produced a brilliant painter like Glenn Brown, who works with all sorts of artists. So he's really interested in people like Fragonard and Boucher, who are like Rococo and sort of painters from France just before the Civil War. So these were all the sort of the flowery scenes. These were all sort of milkmaids wearing sort of frilly tops and stuff, or the swing where the woman is on the swing and you've got all the trees around and she's kicking off her slipper. That's Fragonard, and Glenn Brown loves that sort of stuff. So he's painting that stuff with he's mixing it with Rembrandt and abstract expressionism, and it sounds like a postmodern mess, but actually he synthesizes it very well. So I would say he genuinely loves reactionary things. He genuinely loves stuff that the establishment hates, and he synthesized this in a way that's unique and powerful. So I would say check out his work. His work is extremely expensive, though. You won't be able to afford it.
Good morning, Mr. Alexander Adams. Thank
Hello,
you for
Aidan.
the talk. Thank you. So the question is, how do I become a full-time... sorry. So,
I've got my bulldozer here to run over you.
I was about to say yes, Daddy, but no. Essentially, so I'm a writer, a few other writers and artists in this crowd, which is all great. You've sort of touched on this, but what sort of moral and social responsibilities do we have as creators? And I'm not necessarily talking about within this sphere of stuff. I guess there are specific moral duties, etc., because we are in this sphere. But in general, what do moral and social responsibilities do creators and artists have in your estimation?
Well, this is a tricky question, because raised as a liberal, or as a sort of or libertarian, sort of like, and my own personal opinion is like what people get up to in the bedroom is their business, and but obviously I'm also enough of a reactionary to know that a whole bunch of people doing a whole bunch of things creates a society and has a certain expectation and leads to the acceptance or the rejection of certain values that obviously have political and moral connotations. It's very tricky as to how you apply your moralism to your work. I think the best thing you can do is just simply to be as honest as possible. There is the idea of the noble lie, which is from Plato, which said that it's virtuous for a ruler to lie to his people in order to preserve order, to get them to follow the rules. And this might involve, like a national legend, a national myth, a civic story about the foundation of Rome, for example, Romulus and Remus and whatever. So you could lie to the population, but the population could never lie to the ruler. And then you have this question of, well, do I lie in order to try and establish a social system which is beneficial, which is broadly beneficial and does good things for people, but it involves me knowingly deceiving people? And this is, I think this is a moral question that we'll face. I think it's a question that also faces people who are social conservatives, who are reactionary, who are worried about where we are at the moment, and they're thinking about Christianity, but they also don't actually believe in God, and they don't believe that religion is true, but they think religion is useful, that it's a useful binding agent. And of course religion is a useful binding agent, but should you start supporting a religion or even practicing a religion because you think it's useful, or you think it's the right thing to do for your children and so forth, even if you don't believe it? That's a big moral question for everyone, not just artists, but that's a very good point.
You speak about the duty to look at the more ugly or repugnant sides of humanity, and it makes me think of Duchamp's Fountain. As a piece of art, historically, how do you think that piece of art emerged? What is its historical importance? And what would be the difference in Duchamp's approach and the more conservative approach?
Okay, well, Duchamp's Fountain, for anyone who doesn't know, I think it was in 1913, there was the Armory show, which was a big show of modernist art. Marcel Duchamp was a member of or would become a member of the, well, this was during the First World War, during the 1910s. Duchamp was a member of the Dadaist group, which was basically nihilism. It was basically a response to the war, and it was basically, well, look at what modern life, look at what modern technology has done to the world. It has devastated the world. It has obliterated a whole generation of young men. And the response was, we are going to mock everything. We are going to undermine everything. We are going to prick the bubble of pomposity. But what they also did was they turned art into the business of nomination. So you no longer make an artwork, you simply nominate this as an artwork. So this is my new artwork, lectern, made in aluminium. This will be exhibited later, and I won't be able to sell it because it belongs to the university. But so you'd nominate something as an artwork. Then I think that's fundamentally antithetical to the reactionary point of view, which is that you actually make. So just as the Aristotelian man embodies virtues by acting them out in real life, you make reactionary art by making something that embodies your values of truth. And if you want to go back to the Greeks, you go back to truth, beauty, and goodness, and you'd embody that in a work of art that was made by you, or made by your family in the workshop, the Renaissance workshop. So yeah, it's not a business of, it's not logic chopping, it's not naming, it's not nominating, it's actually doing something, it's making something and investing yourself in, and as regards to Radlib, not being ironical, actually genuinely meaning it, and being willing to be criticised, being willing to be laughed at because you've made a mistake. Because it's only when you take risks, it's only when you make an investment, like with Nomos, for example, or Shieldings, when you actually invest and make a risk, that you've actually achieved anything. If you don't risk anything, if you don't invest anything, if you don't put your name out, I know some of you can't put your names out, but it's always best to take as big a risk as you think you can, or even more than you think you can. Actually committing to something, being open to being criticised, being laughed at, being mocked, because a lot of the great art that we love was mocked originally. And maybe some of it still needs to be mocked, but yeah, it's actually committing.
What role does the law have in promoting destructive and ugly art in the art world?
Quite a lot. I think that, or rather non-application of the law. So sovereign is he who makes the exception. So Carl Schmitt, is that right? Yeah. So a lot of places, a lot of arts charities are not actually arts charities at all. They're political groups, which contravenes charity law. Now, of course, you should be able to use lawfare, which is your area, and go after an organisation and say, hey, look, you know, this thing that you're calling art is, well, this is actually just like allowing illegal immigrants to enter the country, and you're just sort of turning it into an artwork. Because, of course, postmodernism allows you to nominate things. So you can nominate a soup kitchen as art, and this becomes artivism. So this is the subject of my latest book. So artivism is using political action, but using the funds, the venues, and the status of art to enact your political will. Now, in the old days, you'd get a skilled artist to paint you a fantastic picture which would persuade something about your glory. So you won a great victory as a general or as a king. You get your court painter to paint you on a giant steed trampling your enemies. Now you just trample your own people by inviting people in to turn a soup kitchen into art. So you just open up the gallery, you put in a soup kitchen and say, oh, your homeless people are going to come in, and we're going to sort of challenge your assumptions of what political action and artwork is. And this is something that happens because the law is not applied in a way. So this is rather than a positive application of the law, this is the negation, because this is the application of not taking away the funding from charities which are tax-free because they claim the status of art. If they actually were held to the rules that are written down on the books, they would be stripped of their tax-free status as charities because they're actually performing political actions which are prescribed by the Charities Commission rulebook. But of course, the Charities Commission is basically another node of progressivism, the Progressivists, Conservative Party. So it's all part of one organisation that essentially looks after itself and is not actually regulated. So.
I was just going to make a comment about Duchamp. He is important, and I think his toilet is a groundbreaking work of art, but that's because you can only do ugliness once, whereas beauty has infinite variety. So all ugliness is essentially the same, and the repetition of it, you could never do the toilet twice. So that's the only relief I can think of.
Yes, except because you've got people who make their career out of doing the same thing but with just different objects and pretending that it's new. Yeah, certainly.
We've got enough time for one more question, if anyone wants one.
Well, Mr. Adams, thank you for an excellent talk. Hopefully there are others in the room who are laymen when it comes to art as well. I have a very casual appreciation. But I find it a very fascinating topic. And I wanted to ask you, I see kind of in right-wing Twitter and right-wing spaces on the internet, people who also probably are laymen when it comes to art, expressing categorical disdain for modern art. Modern art is degenerate, it's all bad, it's all like the toilet painting, which I think, or sculpture. I believe I'm familiar with that one, unfortunately. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Impressionism can be considered maybe the first modern art movement. I've seen some claim that. I don't know if it's true, but I find Impressionism relatively pleasing. So my question to you is do you view modern art categorically as being degenerate, bad? Are there modern art forms that are perhaps compatible with our views broadly as right-wingers, reactionaries, and so forth? Thank you.
Well, as Columba pointed out in the panel last night, you can be a reactionary and you can embrace modernism. So Pound, the early Eliot, lots of other, Celine, for example, the great novelist, technically modernists, politically reactionary. Salvador Dali, to a degree, traditional painting technique, loved the old masters, had a brilliant grasp of, certainly familiarity with the old masters, but he was temperamentally more reactionary or a dissenter or a dissident. So yes, I think that I think it's a problem. The idea of associating tradition with perennial values or stability, I think, is a problem, because what you'll get is you'll end up with biscuit tin nationalism. So what you'll get is people saying, oh, well, you know, I love landscape paintings, or I love the flag, I love the church, or I love the monarchy. That's always been there. We should pledge our allegiance to it, not realizing that actually what they're doing is they're attached to a form, they're attached to an institution which has become hollowed out, which has become meaningless, which has often been parasitized and been perverted. So a lot of the time, what you think is a reactionary position or a reactionary aesthetic is actually subverted. I think that's a big problem, that we have to look at the essential principles of the art that's being made, rather than looking at just the external form. Although, of course, with art, of course, that is the first thing that strikes you. So, very good question. Thank you.